The moment the grid collapses, everything that defines modern American life vanishes in a silence, so profound it registers as physical shock. There is no warning klaxon, no presidential alert scrolling across your phone screen, no emergency broadcast cutting through your favorite streaming service. The lights simply die, and with them dies the intricate latticework of systems that holds a superpower together. This is not a localized brownout where you grumble about spoiled milk and reschedule tomorrow's Zoom call. This is a cascading failure across the entire United States power infrastructure, a phenomenon that begins with a single overloaded transmission line in one region and propagates like a contagion through the Eastern Interconnection, the Western Interconnection, and the Texas grid, each of them linked by invisible electronic impulses that maintain phase synchronization and load balancing across thousands of miles. When one major line trips due to excessive current draw, automatic protective relays disconnected instantly to prevent equipment damage. But that action forces the electrical load onto neighboring lines that may already be operating near capacity. If those lines cannot handle the surge, their breakers trip as well. And within seconds you have a domino effect that racing engineers cannot halt. The 2003 Northeast blackout, which left 55 million people without power, unfolded in precisely this manner when a transmission line in Ohio sagged into overgrown trees and tripped offline at 4:13 in the afternoon, setting off a cascade that shut down 265 power plants in less than 9 minutes and plunged cities from Detroit to New York into chaos. Researchers analyzing that event documented how interconnected grid architecture, designed for reliability and efficiency, became the very mechanism of its undoing. Because electricity flows along paths of least resistance, and when those paths vanish, the system destabilizes faster than human operators can react. Keep watching until the end to fully understand how this unfolding catastrophe reshapes every dimension of American life in the first 12 hours. And please comment below with your city and country so we can see where this message is reaching. Tonight, as streetlights blink out across urban cores and suburban subdivisions alike, millions of Americans reach instinctively for their smartphones, only to discover that cellular networks have collapsed alongside the power grid. Modern cell towers rely on grid electricity, supplemented by backup batteries designed to provide perhaps 4 to 8 hours of service during typical outages. But in a nationwide event, those batteries drain simultaneously, while diesel generators at critical sites run dry because fuel delivery trucks cannot pump gas from underground storage tanks that require electric pumps. Within 30 minutes, text messages fail to send, voice calls drop mid-sentence, and the reassuring glow of Wi-Fi routers fades to black, severing households from the digital ecosystem that has become as essential as running water. Payment systems freeze instantly because point-of-sale terminals, ATMs, and bank servers all depend on continuous electricity and network connectivity, which means the economy effectively halts, even though cash still holds theoretical value. People standing in grocery store aisles with carts full of canned goods and bottled water discover that their credit cards are useless, their banking apps are dead, and the stores themselves have no way to process transactions or even calculate change without electric registers. This is the first visceral lesson of a grid failure. Our financialized, digitized economy is staggeringly fragile, a house of cards built on the assumption that electrons will always flow on demand. The three major power grids serving the continental United States operate as semi-independent networks: the Eastern Interconnection, covering roughly everything east of the Rockies, the Western Interconnection, spanning the Pacific states and mountain regions, and the Texas Interconnection, serving most of the Lone Star State in deliberate isolation from federal oversight. Each grid maintains precise alternating current at 60 Hz, synchronized across thousands of generators and millions of endpoints, a technical marvel that requires constant real-time adjustments to match supply with fluctuating demand. When a cascading failure begins, whether triggered by equipment malfunction, cyberattack, solar storm-induced geomagnetic currents, or a simple operational error, the synchronized dance disintegrates into chaos. Generators suddenly lose load and begin to accelerate out of phase with the grid frequency, forcing automatic protective systems to disconnect them to prevent catastrophic mechanical damage to turbines spinning at 3,600 revolutions per minute. Once enough generators drop offline, the remaining plants cannot support total demand. Voltage sags across entire regions, and more protective relays trip in a self-reinforcing collapse. Studies of cascade dynamics in power grids, including research published in journals analyzing the 2003 blackout, emphasize that these failures happen on timescales of minutes to hours overall, but often involve critical tipping points that unfold in mere seconds, far faster than human operators can assess the situation and intervene. The National Academy of Sciences and congressional hearings have repeatedly warned that the American grid remains vulnerable to this type of systemic failure, particularly as aging infrastructure strains under rising demand and extreme weather events stress transmission capacity. Researchers examining grid topology have demonstrated that the U.S. power network exhibits scale-free characteristics, meaning a few critical nodes carry disproportionate loads, and targeting those nodes through physical sabotage or cyber attack could precipitate nationwide collapse. In war game scenarios conducted by defense analysts and emergency management agencies, participants consistently discover that federal and state governments lack the resources, communication capability, and prepositioned equipment to restore power quickly across millions of square miles, especially when the cascading failure has damaged transformers and substations that require months to manufacture and replace. The psychological impact of sudden darkness registers differently across American communities depending on geography, population density, and cultural context. In dense urban centers like New York City or Chicago, where millions of people live stacked in high-rise apartment buildings, the blackout transforms familiar environments into alien landscapes. Elevators freeze between floors, trapping occupants who pound on metal doors and scream for help that cannot arrive because emergency services are overwhelmed by tens of thousands of simultaneous calls on failing phone networks. Stairwells plunge into blackness, and residents attempting to descend from upper floors stumble over steps they cannot see, twisting ankles and fracturing wrists in falls that would be trivial in daylight but become serious injuries in the dark. Traffic signals go dead at thousands of intersections, and drivers accustomed to the orderly flow of red, yellow, and green suddenly confront a free-for-all where might makes right and the risk of collision spikes. Subways halt deep underground, stranding passengers in tunnels that grow stifling as ventilation systems fail, and transit workers trained for emergencies struggle to evacuate trains using hand-cranked doors and flashlights that reveal crowds on the edge of panic. Suburban neighborhoods experience the blackout as disorientation rather than claustrophobia, because single-family homes offer space and private yards, but the absence of streetlights renders familiar streets unrecognizable, and residents who routinely drive home on autopilot find themselves lost within blocks of their own driveways. Rural areas, paradoxically, may adapt most readily because residents often maintain practical skills and equipment for self-sufficiency: generators, well water systems, wood stoves, firearms, that urban and suburban populations outsourced decades ago to utility companies and municipal services. The cultural dimension matters profoundly in shaping responses. American identity emphasizes individualism, self-reliance, and suspicion of centralized authority, which means many people instinctively prepare to defend their homes and families rather than wait for government rescue. Faith communities, particularly in the South and Midwest, serve as organic organizing hubs where pastors and congregants gather by candlelight to pray, share resources, and coordinate neighborhood watches, drawing on deep traditions of mutual aid that predate modern welfare states. Within the first hour after the grid fails, the cascading breakdown extends far beyond simple loss of lighting and electronics. Municipal water systems begin to falter because pumps that maintain pressure in distribution networks require continuous electricity. And while elevated water towers provide temporary gravity-fed flow, that reserve depletes quickly as households drain faucets to fill bathtubs and containers against an uncertain future. Wastewater treatment plants lose the ability to process sewage, and in coastal cities with combined sewer systems, overflows begin dumping raw waste into rivers and harbors, creating public health hazards that will compound over days if power is not restored. Hospitals and nursing homes, which house the most vulnerable populations, including patients on ventilators, dialysis machines, and electrically powered medication pumps, switch to emergency generators that are supposed to provide backup for 72 hours, but in reality may fail sooner due to inadequate maintenance, fuel shortages, or simple overload. During the 2003 Northeast blackout, New York City health officials documented that several hospital generators failed outright, forcing staff to manually ventilate critical patients using bag valve masks, while scrambling to transfer others to facilities with working power, a task made nearly impossible by gridlock streets and non-functioning traffic signals. Nursing homes present an even grimmer picture because many elderly residents depend on electric oxygen concentrators, motorized beds, and climate control to survive. And when those systems die, staff trained primarily in custodial care rather than emergency medicine must make agonizing triage decisions about who receives the limited support available. Pharmacies lose the ability to dispense medications because their inventory systems and security protocols depend on computers. And even if pharmacists wanted to hand out prescriptions manually, the darkness makes reading labels dangerous and the legal liability overwhelming. The American economy, which processes trillions of dollars in daily transactions through electronic networks, simply stops when the grid collapses. Stock exchanges cease trading, not because investors panic, but because the physical infrastructure required to match buyers and sellers no longer functions. Banks cannot transfer funds, businesses cannot pay suppliers, and employees suddenly realize that direct deposit becomes meaningless when neither they nor merchants can access accounts. The supply chain that delivers food from farms and factories to grocery stores depends on just-in-time logistics coordinated by computer systems, tracking millions of shipments in real time. And when those systems go dark, trucks loaded with perishable goods sit stranded at distribution centers because drivers have no way to receive routing instructions, and warehouses have no way to process shipments. Gasoline stations become useless even if their underground tanks hold thousands of gallons, because electric pumps cannot transfer fuel into vehicle tanks, a fact that will trap suburban commuters and long-haul truckers within hours as vehicles run dry and highways transform into parking lots. Grocery stores, already picked over by panicked crowds in the first 30 minutes, cannot restock because deliveries have stopped and refrigeration units have failed, turning meat counters and dairy aisles into breeding grounds for bacterial contamination. Agricultural operations face catastrophic losses as automated feeding systems for livestock shut down, climate controls in poultry and hog barns fail, causing mass die-offs from heat stress, and milking machines stop working, leaving dairy farmers with no way to relieve thousands of cows whose udders will become infected and useless within days. The financial fragility of modern America becomes starkly apparent when you recognize that most households maintain less than 3 days of food at home, that supermarkets stock only enough inventory to last 48 hours under normal conditions, and that the entire distribution system depends on electricity and diesel fuel that are themselves products of electricity-dependent refineries and pipelines. Human behavior during the first night of a nationwide blackout follows patterns documented in previous disasters, but amplified by scale and uncertainty. Most people respond with remarkable calm initially, drawing on deep wells of resilience and social cohesion that pessimists underestimate. But that calm erodes as hours pass without information, without contact with loved ones, without any indication that authorities have the situation under control. Misinformation spreads through word of mouth faster than truth because rumor travels at the speed of panic, and official channels have been silenced by the communication breakdown. Someone hears from a neighbor who heard from a coworker that this is a terrorist attack, a Russian cyber weapon, a solar storm of biblical proportions, and within minutes entire neighborhoods accept as fact scenarios that are pure speculation. Panic buying begins even though electronic payment systems have failed, because people barter, offer IOUs, or simply loot when they believe survival is at stake, and store owners who attempt to maintain order find themselves facing crowds that outnumber them 100 to 1. Police departments struggle to respond as emergency call centers are flooded with reports they cannot dispatch because radio systems designed for local coverage lack the redundancy and power backup to function during extended grid failure. Some officers abandon their post to check on their own families, a rational human choice that nonetheless accelerates the breakdown of civil authority. And the thin blue line that separates order from chaos reveals itself to be far thinner than comfortable myth suggests. Yet alongside these signs of breakdown, you also witness extraordinary acts of solidarity and improvisation. Neighbors who barely knew each other before the blackout pool resources, shared generators and food, organize watch shifts to deter looters, and care for elderly or disabled residents who cannot manage alone. Churches, synagogues, and mosques open their doors as refuges where people gather not only for spiritual comfort, but for practical coordination. Because religious institutions often maintain networks of volunteers trained in disaster response and charity work. The streets after full dark present an environmental transformation that Americans raised in artificially illuminated cities and suburbs have never experienced and cannot adequately imagine until they stand in it. Total darkness, the kind that existed before Edison and Westinghouse wired the nation, reclaims territory that humans have controlled for more than a century. And with that darkness comes a sensory deprivation that disorients even people who think they know their neighborhoods intimately. Your eyes, adapted to constant low-level light pollution from street lamps and porch fixtures, and the glow of electronics bleeding through curtains, struggle to adjust to an absence so complete that you cannot see your own hand held at arm's length. The moon, if it rises at all, provides only faint illumination filtered through atmospheric haze and obscured by buildings and trees, insufficient for navigation and wholly inadequate for identifying potential threats or obstacles. Stumbling becomes inevitable as people misjudge curbs, trip over toys left in yards, collide with parked cars they cannot see until impact, and the minor injuries that would require a simple bandage in normal times become serious medical emergencies when hospitals are overwhelmed and ambulances cannot navigate blacked-out streets. Wildlife, which has learned over generations to avoid human activity zones defined by noise and light, cautiously ventures into residential areas emboldened by the sudden silence and darkness. Raccoons, coyotes, deer, and even larger predators in regions where they still exist begin exploring streets and yards in search of food, drawn by the scent of garbage that residents have set out unaware that collection services will not arrive, and that leaving organic waste exposed invites animals accustomed to foraging in environments less hospitable than an American suburb. Domestic dogs and cats, spooked by the strangeness and their owners' anxiety, bolt from yards and homes, adding to the confusion as people search frantically for beloved pets using flashlights that reveal only narrow cones of visibility in an ocean of black. The soundscape changes as well, because the constant background hum of electrical devices, air conditioning compressors, refrigerator motors, and distant traffic that defines modern American life vanishes, replaced by an eerie quiet broken only by voices, footsteps, and the rustle of wind through trees that suddenly sounds threatening rather than peaceful. Emergency services, which Americans take for granted as reliably available within minutes of dialing 911, collapse under the weight of simultaneous crisis across jurisdictions that have never coordinated for an event of this magnitude. Fire departments respond to thousands of structure fires, ignited by candles that tip over, overloaded generators that spark, and residents attempting to cook indoors using charcoal grills or camp stoves without adequate ventilation, producing deadly carbon monoxide that kills silently in sealed homes designed for climate control rather than natural airflow. Firefighters arriving at scenes discover that hydrant pressure has dropped because water pumps are offline, forcing them to rely on tanker trucks that carry limited capacity and cannot be refilled. And in dense neighborhoods where fires spread from building to building, those limitations translate directly into catastrophic losses that would have been contained easily under normal conditions. Ambulance services face impossible triage decisions as call volumes exceed available units by orders of magnitude, and dispatchers trained to prioritize life-threatening emergencies must decide whether a reported heart attack takes precedence over a multi-vehicle collision or a home invasion or an insulin-dependent diabetic whose refrigerated medication has spoiled. The vehicles themselves become liabilities as fuel reserves deplete and no means exists to refill tanks, stranding ambulances mid-route and forcing paramedics to abandon patients or attempt transport in civilian vehicles flagged down on darkened streets. Police departments, understaffed and overwhelmed even during routine operations in many American cities, simply cannot maintain order across sprawling jurisdictions when communication networks fail, patrol cars run out of gas, and officers face the moral calculus of protecting strangers versus securing their own families in a situation that increasingly resembles societal collapse. Some departments implement emergency plans that pull officers back to defensive positions around critical facilities such as hospitals, water treatment plants, and fuel depots, effectively ceding residential and commercial districts to whatever order or chaos emerges organically from the population. Other departments attempt to maintain visible patrols using whatever resources remain available. But those efforts spread thin across large areas provide more symbolic reassurance than practical security. And criminals who recognize the opportunity exploit it with burglaries, carjackings, and assaults that go unreported because victims have no way to contact authorities and no expectation that help would arrive even if they could. The economic freeze that begins in the first hour deepens into paralysis as night progresses and the full scope of the disaster becomes apparent to those with enough information to comprehend it. The United States economy, which generates approximately $70 million in gross domestic product every minute under normal operations, has effectively flatlined, not because assets have been destroyed, but because the systems required to transact, communicate, transport, and account for economic activity no longer function. Corporations with sophisticated business continuity plans discover that those plans assumed localized disasters affecting one region while the rest of the nation remained operational, providing external support and alternative facilities. But a nationwide blackout invalidates every assumption and renders every backup plan useless. Financial institutions cannot reconcile accounts, cannot verify transactions, cannot even determine their own solvency because the electronic ledgers that track money flowing through the economy are inaccessible, frozen in time at the moment the grid failed. Supply chains that span continents and coordinate millions of moving parts through real-time data feeds have fragmented into isolated nodes with no visibility beyond their immediate surroundings. And logistics managers who pride themselves on efficiency now face the reality that their just-in-time systems have zero resilience when the infrastructure supporting them disappears. Manufacturing plants shut down not only because they lack electricity to run machinery, but because workers cannot reach facilities when traffic signals are dark and gasoline unavailable. And even those plants with backup generation capacity recognize that producing goods serves no purpose when finished products cannot be shipped and customers cannot pay. The agricultural sector, which feeds 330 million Americans, plus substantial export markets, confronts cascading failures as irrigation pumps stop, climate-controlled storage facilities fail, and automated feeding systems for concentrated animal operations quit functioning, leading to crop losses and livestock die-offs that will take years to rebuild. Dairy farmers in Wisconsin face the immediate crisis of cows that must be milked twice daily or suffer painful mastitis infections and permanent damage to milk production capacity. But without electricity to run milking machines and refrigerated storage tanks, farmers must dump thousands of gallons of milk or simply stop milking and accept the loss of their herd's productive capacity. Poultry operations in Arkansas and Georgia, which house tens of thousands of chickens in climate-controlled barns dependent on ventilation fans to prevent heat stress, watch helplessly as temperatures inside the structures rise and birds begin dying by the thousands, suffocated by ammonia fumes from their own waste and unable to dissipate body heat in still air designed to be continuously circulated. If you are finding value in this detailed analysis of how a nationwide blackout reshapes American life within the first night, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and activate the notification bell so you do not miss future content exploring preparedness and resilience. Comment below with your city and country so we can see where this information is reaching and build a community of people serious about understanding these challenges. Government agencies at federal, state, and local levels struggle to coordinate responses when the communication systems they depend on have been severed. The Federal Emergency Management Agency activates its National Response Coordination Center in Washington and attempts to deploy resources pre-positioned at strategic locations around the country. But those efforts founder immediately on the reality that FEMA cannot communicate with state emergency operation centers, cannot track what resources are moving where, and cannot even assess the scope of the disaster, because reporting mechanisms depend on electronic networks that no longer exist. State governors declare emergencies and mobilize National Guard units, but those declarations mean little when Guard members cannot be contacted. Armories lack fuel to move vehicles, and the roads those vehicles would travel are clogged with abandoned cars and panicked civilians attempting to flee cities for imagined safety in rural areas. Local officials, mayors, and county executives who find themselves on the front lines of a crisis that exceeds their training and resources by several orders of magnitude, make decisions based on incomplete information and personal judgment, sometimes wisely and sometimes disastrously, and the decentralized structure of American governance that normally provides resilience through redundancy becomes a liability when coordination across jurisdictions requires communication infrastructure that has collapsed. Military installations maintain better operational capability than civilian authorities because defense planning has always assumed the possibility of infrastructure disruption during warfare, and bases operate with organic generation capacity, fuel reserves, and communication systems designed for degraded environments. But even the military cannot project power effectively when the civilian infrastructure supporting logistics and transportation has disintegrated. Continuity of government protocols, developed during the Cold War to ensure that constitutional authority survives nuclear attack, activate automatically as designated officials evacuate to secure bunkers equipped with independent power and communication. But those protocols were designed for a scenario where government survives even if much of the population does not, and they provide little practical help to the millions of Americans trapped in darkness without food, water, or information. The gap between public expectations and institutional reality becomes painfully evident as hours pass without any visible federal response, without reassuring messages from the president or governors, without the arrival of relief convoys or restoration crews. And citizens raised on myths of American exceptionalism and government competence confront the unsettling truth that when truly catastrophic failures occur, individuals and communities are fundamentally on their own for far longer than comfortable narratives acknowledge. The spiritual and psychological dimensions of the first night matter as much as the physical and logistical challenges, because human beings require meaning and hope to maintain cohesion under extreme stress. And the sudden collapse of familiar systems produces existential terror that rational preparations cannot fully address. Fear of the unknown, amplified by isolation and lack of information, triggers primitive survival responses that can manifest as paralysis, aggression, or frantic activity. And people who consider themselves psychologically stable discover reserves of anxiety they did not know they possessed. Parents struggle to comfort children who sense adult fear and ask questions that have no reassuring answers. And the performance of confidence that caregivers maintain requires enormous emotional energy that depletes rapidly as hours stretch toward dawn with no change in circumstances. Faith communities become crucial anchors for psychological resilience, not because religious belief provides practical solutions to material problems, but because shared ritual and communal solidarity offer emotional structure when external structure has vanished. Churches in the American South and Midwest, which have historically served as organizing centers during disasters ranging from hurricanes to floods to economic depressions, open their doors and light candles and gather congregations for prayer services that provide comfort and practical coordination simultaneously. Pastors and priests trained in pastoral care counsel frightened parishioners, organize sharing of resources, and establish communication networks through runners who carry messages between neighborhoods because phones no longer work. Synagogues and mosques perform similar functions for Jewish and Muslim communities, drawing on ancient traditions of mutual aid and collective responsibility that predate modern welfare states and retain vitality precisely because they were developed for environments where external help could not be assumed. Even secular Americans often gravitate toward these faith-based gatherings not because they have suddenly embraced religion, but because they recognize that organized communities with clear leadership and established trust networks function better under crisis than atomized individuals trying to navigate chaos alone. The uniquely American cultural tension between rugged individualism and communal solidarity plays out in thousands of small decisions as people weigh whether to barricade themselves in fortified homes or join collective efforts to maintain neighborhood security and share resources. And those decisions reflect not only immediate calculations about safety and survival, but deeper beliefs about human nature, social obligation, and the proper relationship between self-interest and common good. Survival priorities that seemed abstract when discussed in preparedness forums and online communities become urgently concrete as the first night wears on and Americans confront the reality that basic needs, once satisfied effortlessly through utility payments and retail purchases, now require active effort and scarce resources. Light becomes the first desperate requirement because human psychology cannot tolerate extended darkness, and households exhaust flashlight batteries within hours as people compulsively check on family members, inspect homes for damage, and simply seek reassurance that they can still see. Candles provide longer-lasting illumination, but introduce fire hazards that multiply when dozens or hundreds burn simultaneously in homes filled with flammable materials and occupied by people too distracted by crisis to monitor open flames carefully. Improvised lighting using cooking oil and wicks, a technique known to previous generations, but forgotten by modern Americans accustomed to flipping switches, produces dim, smoky light that is better than nothing, but inadequate for any task requiring precision or detail. Water emerges as the second critical priority once initial shock fades and people recognize that municipal systems are failing. And those who filled bathtubs and containers in the first hour congratulate themselves on foresight, while neighbors who hesitated face the prospect of rationing whatever remains in hot water heaters and toilet tanks. Sanitation becomes a pressing concern almost immediately because American toilets depend on water pressure to flush. And without that pressure, waste accumulates in bowls and tanks, creating odor and health hazards that worsen rapidly in warm weather and drive people to seek alternatives they are wholly unprepared to implement. Climate control, heating in winter or cooling in summer, represent a third survival priority that can kill faster than hunger or thirst. Because human bodies tolerate only narrow temperature ranges, and homes designed to be mechanically climate controlled often lack passive features such as thermal mass, natural ventilation, or wood-burning capacity that would provide resilience. Elderly residents and infants face the greatest risk from temperature extremes. And as the night progresses and interior temperatures drift toward deadly ranges, families face agonizing decisions about whether to stay put or attempt evacuation to somewhere theoretically safer, but reachable only by navigating dangerous, darkened streets.